What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is StJohn Lawrence. And I'm just wondering what we did not talk about. We had such a rich conversation that started with Adam stating that very often words get in the way when we facilitate collaboration. So how can we help groups to communicate without words? And then we spoke about the importance of prototyping, especially in the context of service design, where Adam is coming from. And we shared a few facilitation mistakes. So stay tuned for this super rich conversation with Adam, who brings in a wealth of insights and experience from psychology, zoology, theater, and stand-up comedy. So stay tuned. And if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And also in the show notes, you'll find all the links to connect to Adam. Now, enjoy the show. Hi, Adam.
Hi, I'm Miriam.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am very curious what will come up today.
Me too.
About theatrical design, science, mindset, effective facilitation, service design doing, writing books, zoology.
Oh, yeah. Everything at once. Yeah.
Yes. So let's start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
I think I talked about facilitation before I talked about the role of facilitator. When I was quite young, I worked in a large international company, and we kind of had two sets of people in the organization. There was a set of Japanese management and a set of non-Japanese, some managers, but mostly non-managers. So there was kind of a top floor that was mostly Japanese, and some overlap in the middle. And there was a degree of not understanding each other. And I found my role in this organization quite soon as being one of the sort of in-between people who would try and figure out what people was trying to say to each other. And there were language troubles and so on as well, because it was a very international organization. And then try and say, what I think they're saying is this. And having lots of sort of conversations informally around that. And yeah, that was facilitation, I think. That was almost interpretation in some cases between not just languages, but mindsets or approaches or priorities and so on. So that's when I first started talking about that. Then I had some years in teaching, and my mother, who's a wonderful teacher, she's retired now, but she's an amazing teacher. She always talks about teaching as being the facilitation of learning. So yeah, so that's another place that I got that from. And then when we got around to writing a book at some point, they said, you get the facilitation chapter because you're the facilitator. And I'm like, okay, I suppose I am then.
Wonderful. And I love all the different angles that you already bring in, starting with the translation role.
Yeah.
That I think we often underestimate, even if we're in a room full of native speakers.
Oh, yes, hugely, hugely. And I think one of the most powerful, people always ask these questions, what do you do if? And I try to deal with more fundamental levels than that, rather than sort of spot welding things. But the one thing which I nearly always can respond to that question, what do you do when, what do you if, is I'd say what you see, say what you're hearing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that will get you out of so many things. So if you've got two people who are not understanding each other, I might try and paraphrase with permission what one of them is saying and see if that helps the other one. Yeah, or what I think their priorities are. And of course, there are ways that you can do this without actually saying it yourself. You can help them discover it themselves, which is much, much better if that works. But that's always a huge thing. Just people spend so much time on the wrong page or on different pages from each other in organizations. And this is one reason why one of my great leading themes, Leitmotif, you would say in German, through all my work has been what I call doing, not talking. Because people, when they're reliant on words all the time, there is such a high level of misunderstanding and bias around language, and it gets much more, the communication gets much more direct when they stop talking so much and build things or act things out or just try stuff together rather than sitting down and talking about it all the time.
Yeah. And I would love to come to the role play part. And before that, what I also find fantastic in your approach to reply to all the what if questions, that you basically give back responsibility to the group and to the people asking so that they can investigate what they're hearing and step in. And I think that's also something that often goes wrong for facilitators, especially beginning facilitators. They're trying to work too hard.
Certainly, and trying to do everything.
Yeah.
And I'm also one of those facilitators who stays reasonably out of the content. That's a style question. Nothing wrong with going into the content if you can manage it. I like to say I need to understand enough to not make a fool of myself. And I need to have people in the room who say, actually, Adam, this is important. This needs longer. Yeah, this is not as trivial as you think it is. Yeah, I need those allies in the room. But one of the reasons I quite enjoy staying out of it is that because it makes it very, very clear, I'm not here to do the work.
Yes.
I can't do the work. That would be irresponsible for me to do that. It's you doing it, and I'm here to make the space where you can.
Yeah, and you basically help them to make the implicit explicit. Because if you have a room full of subject matter experts, they get so often trapped in the assumption of understanding each other just because they use the same lingo for so many years and never actually investigated whether they understand the same things behind that lingo.
You've spoken two words there which are almost kind of a neon sign in my head, because this is a very big part of my design practice, is the importance of the implicit in what we do. You know, I work, generally people describe my work as being design or design facilitation. The kind of design I do is very collaborative. It's very co-designy. So working with the organization, with the group, is critical to the success of that. And so many important things in design cannot be written down. I mean, you can write a novel, okay, or a poem maybe, but you can't put it on a sticky note. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here between two great German sport fashion manufacturers, and they deal with things like if a thing is cool or not. You can't write down why a thing is cool. You have to look at it. Yeah. And look at the world around it and say, yes, that fits in what's happening right now. I used to have a wonderful old boss back in the day who used to say to me, Adam, if you can't measure it, it's not real. And at some point I said, how much do you love your children? You know, and we had a good relationship. I could say that to him, you know, and he said, infinitely. I said, well, I hope so. Yeah. But give me a number. And he said, well, I can't. And I said, well, is it not real? And that was a great conversation. But I think it's very important to understand that many of the things that we are dealing with in situations don't work well if they're put into words. And that's really, really important. Lots of the books that you read about facilitation and so on assume that the main channel of facilitation and indeed of work, collaboration, is a verbal one.
Because that's our comfort zone.
Yes. There will be spoken or written words, you know, maybe some sticky notes. And that's really, really problematic, I think. One reason is it empowers, again, the same group of people. Yeah, Bob Geldof many years ago said the world is ruled by poets, priests, and politicians. You know, they're the ones who are strong with words. You know, they are the word strong, as a Viking author might say, and they always get airtime. They always get to decide what's happening because they're good with words. But there are people in our organizations who are not good with words. I think I'm one of them, and they are much, much better when they can show you or build a thing. Yeah. Or walk you through a thing. And that is very, very important to acknowledge this. And one of the reasons that works is not just the equity of bringing in other people. It's also the fact that many, many important things don't go into words.
Yes. So we still need the medium of words or talking.
Sure.
And I do agree that when we put the topic into a visual, for instance, draw your understanding of transparency. Then we have a hook and can talk about it in different ways. Is this what you mean?
And that's still word-based. We're now trying to express a word in a visual form. I'm more interested in expressing reality in a visual form, and there might not be a word that fits that.
Can you give an example?
Well, I mean, things like Lego Serious Play. You know, when people build their metaphor of their situation that they're in, and they can point at things and they say, well, this is the flow between us, I guess. And this is there are barriers here and stuff like that. Yeah. There's more they also chose red for that barrier. It's kind of very tall, all these things which are in there, which they don't express in words. Maybe they could if they had more time. And just simply as a designer working with prototypes, I can put a prototype in front of people, and as it's what the ethnographers call a boundary object of sorts, people see it from different points of view. If we're sitting around a plan for a new house and we have the architect there and the person from the protection authority and the electrician, and we say, can we move that doorway? And they can all look at it within their own worlds and say, the electrician can say, yeah, that would not change my life. And the plumber says, well, you need to make a larger pump in here or whatever, and the interior designer says, yes, I love the light. And the person from the protection authority says, no, you can't have a protected doorway, But the point is that they didn't need to understand each other. They could all look at this thing between them and not need language. That's really interesting.
Interesting. And it also sounds as if it removes the personal layer, the relational layer that often gets into the way. That, for instance, if we're not talking about the door, but if we're talking about a strategy and suddenly we have sales and marketing or product and finance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, the example that I use to teach the concept of boundary objects is a bunch of people standing around a prototype of a web page. And it's still in the form it's been made with Lego, just blocks to show what the relative weightings are of things and so on. And people looking at it, and one of them is looking at it from a customer point of view, saying is this or is this not doing what I want it to do at this point? Another one looks at it from a legal point of view and says, well, we can't ask that kind of question, or we need to say that here. And the third person is the IT person saying that's easy or that's hard, to actually get this onto a screen. But they don't need to understand each other because they can read the Lego. Yeah.
And if they don't understand, they can still investigate and be curious about it.
What if this went here? Or can we put that onto the next page and so on?
Yeah.
And I don't even need to explain why in some cases.
And how do you then bring it back down? Because from what I know about the clients, usually they expect at the end some action list, some results that are usually in a written form so that they can send it to the other stakeholders, execute it, put it into their process whatsoever. Mm-hmm. How do you translate it back?
This is one of the differences between what I would call modern ways of design, co-design and so on, and traditional methods of getting things done. I used to work in the motorcycle industry, as I mentioned before, I think. And then we had a very, very clear handover between what we called marketing and the factory. That's what we called the marketing. This is back in the day, man. Marketing was what product, what price, what place, what promotion, not just the promotion question. And there was a massive rift between them. And the transfer over that rift was really two things. It was sometimes very big fat files of paper that nobody ever read, to be honest. Then there were informal communications, which normally took place at urinals in the men's bathroom with all the problems around that.
And not recorded.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there was the final motorcycle that actually arrived, first of all as a couple of hand-built ones for the press. And it wasn't quite a surprise when it turned up, and we'd seen drawings and so on, but it was, So that idea of a handover is a very difficult one. You always lose so much when you try to hand over. I've got friends who are in knowledge management, and they say, if you're really good, you can actually write down 10% of what you know, and the rest of it gets lost. There's a loss of basic information, but there's also what my friend Marcus Hormes calls a break in the chain of empathy. We're back to this implicit stuff. If everything has to go through a formalized handover in words, we lose a lot of data and we lose nearly all the empathy. So what we're trying to do with modern, let's say, project management in design is we have some people who are there all through this thing. Not all of them, and the proportions will change. There will be some people along there who are very good at customer insight and figuring out what people need and so on. But while they're doing that, while they're interviewing people in their homes, there'll be one or two programmers sitting there with them. The guys who are going to build the thing down the road.
That they can ask the right questions right away.
And they'll just take that feeling with them, because later on, those programmers will be making a decision, a technical decision. Do we implement this A or B? Yeah. And if there's a strong impression from, that old gentleman they met 3 months ago who explained his struggle, that's going to influence their decision in the right way, I think. So what we try to do here is, yes, of course, we have to have things like requirements documents and so on, that they're a reality we can't get away from. But they're accompanied by two things. They're accompanied by prototypes, and prototypes say much more than a document does. Often documents are really, really hard, of that kind, are very, very hard to read unless you know what you're fundamentally talking about. So giving a prototype will help you understand the document and carry things the document can't, like coolness, for example. Yeah. And then there are people. There are people who stay with this through the project and can take, hunches and feelings and a mass of experience they can't really express with them into later decisions. And that seems to work much, much better.
Can you translate nearly everything into a prototype? Or what are the boundaries of a workshop challenge that cannot be put into a prototype?
We're not always talking about workshops here. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in my practice is to get facilitators to talk less about workshops and more about projects, because that's what we get taken seriously.
Yes. So can every project be put into a prototype?
Into a collection of prototypes, yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are different aspects of the things that organizations try to put out, whether it's a product or a service, whatever you call that, where you stand on that debate. There are different aspects to it, but you can usually illuminate whatever the basic thing is with a collection of different prototypes. There might be some very straightforward, sketchy, model-y type things to show what it looks like. There might be some interaction things which might be played out or filmed or whatever to show how things work around it. There could be business models, sketchy type, canvas type things and so on. But you can, with a collection of different things, then you can pretty well express what a thing is. And the art is, one, knowing how to do those in the right level of fidelity, for example, and also having an organization that can read them. Mm-hmm. Because if I express a thing, if I make it look very, very real, that brings problems because people assume it's nearly finished and they'll give me very detailed feedback of the 2 pixels to the left type feedback. Yeah.
And they get married to the idea and might not want to change it if they build it themselves.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But if it has a much lower level of, at least, for example, visual fidelity, then people say, we should change that a lot more. Yeah. And sometimes I need that. I need to have that feeling that a thing is a sketch. But some organizations cannot read a sketch. They don't have the skill, or some people, to imagine what that would finally look like. So I have to sort of pitch this right for the audience and the goal of what I'm going for. So I'm facilitating here by a choice of fidelity, a choice of look and feel of a prototype, because I want to get different things out of it. And
also to get the stakeholders then into the mindset of good enoughness.
Yeah, that's a really important one. I mean, one of the things that people get bored with me saying all the time is I keep saying that the 4 most important words in design are good enough for now. Yeah. And each is important. Yeah. It's not just good enough. It's good enough for now. Mm-hmm. And only for now. It may need to be different later on, So.
And then also choosing the right prototype. So is it rather the video or the Lego or the
It's usually a bundle, to be honest. Yeah. It's usually a bundle. Yeah. Because that's what we need to do. Unless you get into very, very complicated, fully immersive virtual reality type things, which can include a lot of that. But even then, can't tell you what it smells like or what it feels like to touch, And if that's important, like the sports fashion companies I mentioned, for them, the feel of the cloth is really, really important. So they make their prototypes in the real cloth.
Yeah.
But if it's going to be a physical device, then maybe the feel of the backside of it isn't very important. For a phone, yes, but not for maybe a wall-mounted object.
Which is a beautiful example of how important the role of the facilitator also is to differentiate the relevant from the irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And because I have the impression that very often, especially when it gets complex and when we're in this grown zone of, we realized it wasn't that easy, or we realized that we're actually not as agreeable as we thought, then groups very quickly get lost in the minute details.
Yeah.
Just to avoid the bigger complex question.
They do, yes. And again, it's a question of do we have a conversation about it, which will tend to often magnify those details and cloud the water even more? Or do we try to find a way which is less verbal around that? One of the things which I often do with people is use prototyping exercises like what's called a bus stop prototype or a service ad, where I say, okay, whatever your current idea now, put it on a poster that I can read in 7 seconds as I walk past a bus stop. Yeah. And then people start sketching and start drawing and having conversations while they're doing that. But they are narrowing down also because the format only allows so much. You know? Yeah. And of course, they still carry complexity with them, which we should always do. We should never forget the real complexity of things. We need enough clarity around what's important within that to actually be able to work with it, to make decisions.
And then define very clear boundaries so that they can really focus on it. And while I hear you speaking about the magic of non-words or non-verbal communication.
Doing not talking, we call it. Yeah.
Non-talking. I'm thinking of your background. So if I'm not mistaken, you studied zoology. So
I did a double degree of zoology and psychology. So I'm a specialist in well, not a specialist, only a bachelor. But my focus was on monkeys, South American monkeys.
Who don't use words. So
they do some language, verbal language, but lots of body language as well, lots of movement language and so on like this. So yeah, they are close to us, remarkably close to us in many things they do, but they are different.
So what have you learned? Because I thought, this is where it comes from, your fascination of communicating without speaking. And maybe. What other ways of communication are there?
Maybe it's very true. I mean, you and I are speaking on a Zoom call right now. Yeah. And there's some really interesting stuff which is not possible because of that. First of all, we're looking each other in the eyes all the time, which is a threat behavior. Yeah. And it's one reason why Zoom calls are quite stressful for some, Zoom, any video chat thing are stressful for some people. And why I always recommend to my online facilitation groups that they switch off self-view. So they're not seeing themselves in the mirror the whole time, and show them how to do that. If you go to, I forget which zoo it is, one in the Netherlands, it might be Rotterdam, I don't remember. And you go into the Great Ape House, where there are closest relatives are there, things like gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans. When you go in there, they give you a pair of glasses to put on, which have like fake eyes painted on them, and the eyes look to the side. So I'm looking at the animals, but they don't think I'm looking at them. So they are much less stressed by having basically a constant stream of aggression from outside the glass, which is what they normally get. People looking straight at them is such an aggressive thing to do. And it's the same for humans as well. If you walk straight towards somebody, Sammy Molko, a great body language trainer. If you see him walk straight towards somebody, it looks like a threat's going to happen. He does the same walk, the same expression. He tilts his head, and now it's fine. Yeah. So that's exactly the same thing. We're using body language all the time. We're using movement, speed all the time, senses of urgency and things like that, which are amalgams of all those things. That's communication. And there's even a degree of chemical and other things about this. We work with, now and again with a wonderful neurologist, up at Potsdam, Caroline Szymanski, and she is interested in when brains synchronize, because now the machines you use to measure brainwaves, this is not woo, this is neurology, the machines you use to measure brainwaves are small enough that you can put them on people and have them do stuff, they can collaborate, So you can measure two sets of brainwaves at once when people are collaborating well and when they're not well. And there is a correlation between synchronization of brainwaves and better collaboration. So it seems when the brains get into sync, we collaborate better. Now, things that can synchronize our brainwaves include smelling the same thing, feeling the same temperature change or air movement and things like this, tasting the same thing. So when you and I are in different countries having a great conversation, we're still not smelling the same thing or feeling the temperature changes. And so there's already a detach there, which would be different if we were in the room. And these things are obviously very true for animals as well.
This is very interesting. And now I wonder whether if both of us would eat an apple. So if we had agreed that before the call or during the call, we share an apple.
It's interesting, isn't it? I work with a great company in Hong Kong called Make. And sometimes when they do, Hong Kong's relatively small from area. So sometimes when they do stuff there, which is online, but it's all folks from Hong Kong, they send a cake out. Everyone gets the same cake, and then you have the same cake at coffee break. And it's a nice thing to do anyway. You're showing, I think, care for people and that you value the togetherness as well. But I wonder if on a neuro level as well, there's something is going on. We all bite into the same chocolate cake.
Yeah. Also, I think sharing food in general has some bonding capacity.
It does.
Because
and the rituals as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we put down our armor, literally. Yes. And I think our brain still works the same way. If we're busy eating, we cannot fight.
Yeah, it's very true. And there are strong social rituals around that as well. If you think about it, nearly all big ceremonies involve some kind of eating, whether it's symbolic eating, like in a communion, or if it's proper eating, like at a big Hindu wedding where eating amazing food for days and days at once. There's always that, or nearly always that aspect of eating, or even if it's just the welcoming champagne at a big, I don't know, diplomatic function or signing a peace treaty.
Yeah, and similar to the sitting in circles, and I think when we met in Amsterdam, we had a very brief conversation about sitting in circles, and I found this fascinating, and it really resonated with me. So you said that you don't put groups in circles without tables because the association to group therapy and potentially trauma.
That's one aspect of it, yes. I mean, I think trauma-informed design is very important. I don't know much about it, but I'm learning from people like Rachel Dietkus and so on this. But it's a very exposed thing to do, to sit in a chair being faced by basically everybody else, with nothing in front of you. And, do I feel comfortable in my clothes? Is my skirt appropriate length? All this kind of stuff. It's just a weird thing to do. Plus that association. So I do use circles of chairs at times, but when I do, it's a big moment. It's an intervention type moment. Yeah. I stand in circles a lot. And that might include someone who's sitting because they don't want to stand or they can't stand or whatever. That's fine. Yeah. But generally where the group is standing in circles, because that's easy to break in and out of. It's not such a thing. No.
And you give agency. So those who want to sit down can, and then it's their choice whether they feel comfortable in it or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I always try to say to folks, I come from theatre, so I am used to working standing up. I mean, in our main workspace in Nuremberg, there are no chairs. There's a sofa, and there are some very uncomfortable high stools, but there are no chairs for that reason. Yeah, because you keep moving and you keep changing constellations of people, and that helps people change their minds and make new alliances and so on, which is really interesting. So when I facilitate groups of people, I have to remember all the time, most folks are not used to spending 7 hours a day on their feet.
I was about to say that.
Yeah. And they suffer, and we try and warn people, maybe don't wear your high heels and stuff like this, but folks still want to wear their high heels, which is great if they look good in them. They feel good in them. So it's like, look after your body. We're going to be standing a lot. There's usually a reason why we're standing, but it's always up to you. Yeah. And most folks will then find their level of pain.
Or comfort.
Yeah. Or comfort.
Yeah. Fascinating. And since you mentioned theater, and you mentioned that you're doing role play, or at least that one option to record a prototype is by recording a video or a little play. And I hear from many who are role play traumatized, small t traumatized.
Or large t traumatized, to be honest. I mean, I've seen that as well. Yeah. I don't ever use the term role play. For that reason, I know this is not a joke. I know more than one person who has in their employment contract they will not be required to do role play.
Can you share a little bit about what is so?
Because they've been so embarrassed by it. Yeah, they've been so embarrassed by it. What you often see? Well, okay, let's talk cliches. Yeah, but the cliche of the bad role play is a training situation. Yeah, people are forced to be there usually. They're handed out a couple of pieces of paper. Okay, you're this person and you're this person. Then the two of you now show us this role play. Yeah. And you get no warm up. You get no time to prepare yourself. You get no time to make it fit you. And so you've struggled your way through it while everyone's watching you. There's no safe space at all. And then the group tells you spends an hour and a half telling you how shit you were with it. Yeah. And a lot of people feel very vulnerable when they're pretending anyway. And then doing that, under the hot glare of everyone's view is, I think, very, very difficult. People are usually very happy to show stuff, but they need to be brought to that place where they're happy showing it and where they don't feel that they're getting focus at the wrong moment, when they don't feel they're being judged maybe or evaluated on this kind of stuff the whole time they're doing it. So I do use lots of things which look exactly like role play. I use things like forum theatre, or in the form we use it, it's called investigative rehearsal. I use simulations, body storming, stuff like this. I'll choose a term which fits the group. It might be something very technical, like a simulation, or it might be a thing which is very simple, like show me. And everything in between that. But I very rarely use, or never, if it's not colleagues, will use the term role play for this reason.
Again,
also, I'm rarely asking folks to play a role. It's like, what would you do in this situation?
And maybe that's a big difference.
Yeah, I think so.
And then it all depends on how we debrief that. Because if we're asking them not to play a role, then we have to create even more of a safe space, because then if we're commenting on what has happened, it's more personal, where I think the role play is often mistaken as, oh, you can hide behind the role. It's not you. And then we can speak about the role and not about you.
Yeah. And I often use some quite clumsy language to get around that. So we might be, for example, in a design project, we might play through a new prototype. Yeah. Or we might take a real story that people have experienced and recreate that, almost like a sort of a playback theatre type thing, but where everyone's getting involved in it, and we are trying to find new options. And then it's always not what did you think of what Miriam did, yeah, but what did you think of what the cashier currently played by Miriam did? Yeah. So we're kind of trying to bring in both contributions to there, the role and we call them spectators, in the words of Boal, the people who are taking part in this. But we're pointing out that it's not you. Yeah, it's you in service of telling this story or making this prototype.
Yeah. Would you consider an activity like the 5 hats? Is it in the category of a role play, or how would you? I
wouldn't classify it like that, no, because we're not trying to create a situation. We are being given roles, certainly. Yeah, but it's not an attempt to pretend to be somebody else. It's asking us to focus on a particular part of our skill set, maybe, which I think is quite useful. Why not?
Why not? So how do you warm up to these kind of plays then? How do you create the mental mindset, but also the safe space around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think safe space is 2 things. For me, safe space is a physical and a mental space. So there are lots of things that we do with the space when we're setting these things up. When I facilitate, I have quite a 1.5-page technical rider for how the room can be. Yeah, that includes things like movable furniture and controllable light and temperature, and no one's looking in, no visitors, etc., etc. All these things are set up, and I shut the door. You shut the door, and if it's a glass door, you put a poster on it so you can't see through it. I mean, not like hermetically seal it off, but so there's a sight break between you and the outside world. Then you do things like you start conservatively. So I usually work in a suit, which I take the jacket off fairly early on and roll the sleeves up at some point. Yeah. So you using costume also, you start by showing that you have maybe a degree of trustworthiness or conservatism or whatever you think the suit shows. Yeah. And the books are there, and I can call myself a adjunct professor if I want to, and stuff like this. So all these kind of things can be useful when you start off. And early on, I made some mistakes in my career by going in too hard and too fast. And people generally had a good time because people seem to have fun, most of them, doing what we do. But then they'd say after half a day, this is great, but what's it for? Well, why are we doing this? They weren't connecting it to their work. So although very soon the room gets broken up and we're building, different table islands and work areas and so on, initially a very conservative setup in the room, straight lines of chairs and PowerPoint. And you say if ideally you get the video from the CEO saying, it's good that you're all here today. This is a really important part of our work. This is project so-and-so. It's sponsored by Susan and myself. It's part of your assessment on category 4, boom, boom, boom. So they see this is work. And then we can get the rubber chickens out and go crazy. We can do weird stuff. Once we've established that point, that helps people to know that. They know it's not just silly. And I think a couple of other things we talked about already, sharing responsibility. So contracting is a very big part of my practice. This is a thing I've learned in a more formal way from Renata Shergenrod, a brilliant colleague, about having a deal at the start of the day about what do we want to get to and what's your part and what's my part.
Okay, so also sharing the responsibility, giving agency.
Very much so. And giving the opportunity also not to take part in stuff. I mean, I often quote Tyagi, who says there are two types of people in the world. There are people who learn making a fool of themselves and people who learn by watching others making a fool of themselves. And both of those are useful as long as you're learning.
Yeah.
So it's fine if someone doesn't want to jump in and sits down and contributes in some other way. That's fine, as long as they're contributing.
Yeah. And you mentioned the PowerPoint and the video of the CEO. And I love that because I'm surprised. And I wonder whether what I hear you saying is what you mean, that by creating this sort of familiarity, so you're using a medium that they're used to, and therefore made them understand that, okay, it is work. There's also something familiar, and then you can break out of that.
Yes.
Whereas very often I hear, and I think this would be the approach that I have, and now I'm reflecting on yours, breaking them immediately out of their usual context so that they know, okay, this is different. We have to think differently.
Yes. And I do that quite soon. There will be, I've done 30 years of theatre. I know some very, very extreme warm-up activities, which, people literally sweat and shout and stuff like this. But if I go straight into that, well, there are some folks who are going to say, why? Why are we doing this? Why? I'm embarrassed. I don't want to know why I'm embarrassed. Most folks are okay with being a bit out of their comfort zone if there's a good reason for it. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other folks who jump into that stuff straight away. Great. I've got them anyway. I don't need to persuade them. But the folks who want to know a reason, who want to think before they do, they need to have time to do that. And with this sort of connection to the daily business, then they get that time and they also get the reasons. They know this is part of strategic plan B, whatever it is. Yeah. There's a saying in design, which is you have to pick people up where they are. Mm-hmm. We can wish they were different, often wrongly, because who says that we're right? Yeah. But wherever they are is where they are. And there's no point wishing they were somewhere else. You've got to go there and pick them up. And if their every day is bullet points on PowerPoint slides and sitting in rows with someone in a suit at the front, that's where I start for the first 20 minutes of the day. And after that, it can go all kinds of places with their permission.
Beautiful. I think I would always be afraid that I lose the momentum and that once they're sitting down and watching a PowerPoint, the entire being gets into receiving passive mode. Oh, okay, we're here for the same show as always.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
I won't pick them up again.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I come from showbiz, I come from theatre, I come from comedy, pacing is really, really important. And there is a degree of fear around losing that. But sometimes that's really, really important. Once again, in the early days, my colleague Marcus Holmes and myself, he's my business partner at Workplay Experience, we were doing a thing around management as a service. Yeah. So management in service of the organization, in service of those who are managed. Yeah. And we planned our typical, quite, wacky, fun-filled, up-tempo kind of day. And in the middle of the afternoon, the team we were working with, and it was like two closely associated teams, they were in a huddle around the table and they were all leaning in. Yeah. And there were low voices and we thought we'd lost them. We really thought we've messed up. We've lost the momentum. We've lost the speed. We wanted to have a big boom coming up right now, which for us meant action. Mm-hmm. But in fact, they were having a big boom. They were having a conversation which they needed to have for a year and a half. And maybe through luck, maybe because we made a bit of a safe space, maybe some combination of those, that happened that day. And for them, it was the most important thing of the day. And it was a huge boom for them. It was a very, very quiet moment. And we had to learn that sometimes people can be very engaged in stuff that does not engage me. That's so important to understand that not everybody likes to do things the same way. And we need to have a mix.
One question I ask all my guests is, what makes a workshop fail?
That's a great question. And I really thought hard about that one. I think there are a bunch of things, and they can be super banal stuff like timekeeping. I mean, it's just, I see so many other things where I'm involved as a facility, and they say, yeah, we need to go over another hour. And you think, well, how did that happen? There's no way that can happen. I mean, I'm German, I don't want things to, it's finished when I say it's finished. It's 5:00 and maybe 3 minutes past 5. But 5:15 is a crisis, never mind 6:30. Yeah. But that happens all the time. Or it doesn't, it does stop and it's not finished. Then projects fail because they run over, because workshops run over. So there's very, very fundamental things like timekeeping. Doesn't mean it has to be me that does it, but there's an agreement in the room on how it's going to happen. Yeah. And what's going to happen if we do get short of time? What do we cut? This kind of thing. But I think more usually facilitation fails, and projects, I'm going to avoid the word workshops, but projects and so on, facilitated formats fail because there is not agreement on why we are here. And that does not mean an imposed agreement where someone says we are here to do this. This means actually having the opportunity for everyone to say what they want to get out of this and check in with the other people and see, can we accommodate those? And this is why on a one-day format, as part of a project, I might spend 45 minutes on contracting. And that really surprises people because it's much easier to put up a flip chart. These are the 3 rules that are okay for everybody. Fine, let's go. Yeah? But no one feels committed to those. And they're not learning anything by doing that either.
And it reminds me of 2 kind of the standard sayings: slow down to speed up, connection over content.
Yeah. Yeah, people first. I mean, this is... And we're paid for the content, yeah. And the faster we get it done, the cheaper we are for them, So there is a tension on this. There is a pressure, and I think one of the things that one of the ways we earn our money as facilitators, whether that's our job title or not, many managers do this, or leaders, or just team members do this. One of the reasons that we're useful is because we can balance those needs. Yeah, we can help the group to balance those needs better, to say there is a sponsor need which we're not serving right now, and there's a need in the room which needs to be served as well, and they seem to be in conflict. What are we going to do about that?
And how do you usually treat that? Because often we come to a point where we can either follow the group needs or the stakeholder, the client needs. Where would you go?
The group decides. Full stop.
In service of the group, always.
Because it's their day. Yeah. And I'm probably being briefed and told by the sponsor and being paid by that person. Yeah. So at one point it might become okay, I see what you need to do is not what I've been asked to do today. Let's have a coffee break. I'm going to make a phone call. And then I make a phone call and say, dear sponsor, you want to do this, but the group wants to do this. What do you want to do about that? So this is yes, it's an abdication of responsibility in both directions, but I'm not there to lead this. I'm there to facilitate this. Yeah. And that's a very different thing. I might lead the process, but not lead the decisions about where it's going to go, because that's what they get paid for.
That's a very interesting distinction, because I see facilitators as leaders, and we do need to show these leadership skills, especially in these situations. And it requires leadership to then bring them together or to decide, okay, we're going in this direction, or we poke and challenge the sponsor that the initial brief isn't valid anymore.
Yes, and we're leading some things. Yeah, so we've been asked to set up and move through a process which will give a certain result. Yeah. That is part of usually a larger project, part of a larger strategy within the organization, which they're investing money in, and they use formats like workshops and so on to get that done. But I'm not leading that project. I'm not even leading their daily work. Yeah, I'm leading this format. And there are format questions. Okay, let's take a break and so on, where I do feel qualified to do that. Or I think there's a better way to doing this. Would you let me take you through a better way of doing this? That's a kind of leadership too. But there are situations where this is yours. It's very, very appropriate. And I think leaders can do that as well, because that is a kind of a form of leadership which gives responsibility.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a story. Myself and Renatus and my other colleagues, we do contracting by asking basically 3 questions in a certain special way. Lots of fun stuff happening. But the 3 questions come down to: what needs to happen for this to be successful? How do you need to be, dear participants, to make that happen? And how can we facilitators support you in being like that? Those are the 3 questions that we ask. Yeah. And we write them down on a flip chart, and that's a very short version of it, on a flip chart, and we say, okay, this is an open document, we can change it anytime, but we will change it explicitly. We will do it transparently and write it down on here. Is that okay? Yeah. And I'm going to ask you to keep us to what we promised. And if it's okay, we'll keep you to what you promised. Then I think we can reach these things. Or not that one. We said that was whatever. Yeah. But it's hanging there. And I do this with a bunch of, well, there are various stories around this one. One nice example, a bunch of people who literally move billions of dollars around, billions of euros around because they're part of the European investment, public money type setup. And they want to achieve this and get clarity on that and get a timeline for this and so on and so forth. And they want to be respectful and they want to be attentive and focused and all the things everyone always says. And they want us to be, strict, but not too strict. And they want us to keep the time. And it's the usual contract. And halfway through the first day, they're just not doing it. They are being horrid to each other. I mean, there's people like someone's presenting and someone takes a phone call and walks like 15 centimeters in front of the person's nose while they're presenting. Yeah. I mean, that's more than rude. That's aggression, I would say. Yeah. And there's all kinds of stuff. And people not coming back from breaks, coming back late from breaks and side conversations and all the stuff they said they didn't want to do. And so this is a chair circle moment. So I come back from a break, there's a circle of chairs. We say, okay, now you're all back from the break. Are we doing our part? And they go, yeah, you're good. Okay, because we're not seeing you doing this. We're not seeing the things you want it to be. And that's fine, but it means we can't achieve these things. So what do you want to do? Do you want to keep doing that, or do you want to achieve these goals you set today? I don't care. And that's a really important thing to be able to say is, I don't care. You might say it in softer words than that. I leave it up to you, whatever you want to say. But the point is, it's up to them to decide, do they fix their behavior or do they achieve the goal or not achieve the goals? And that is very much trusting them to make the decision, but also having the strength to say, if they say, no, we want to make phone calls and look at Facebook, that you say, okay, I will support you in that because that's what you decided to do.
And this holding the mirror, holding them accountable and
giving them the choice. Yeah. And telling, as you say, holding the mirror, telling them what you see. You're not saying you're being a beep. Yeah. You're saying, I saw people not coming back from lunch. I saw people making phone calls while others were presenting. It doesn't seem to me to fit what you said you wanted to be today.
Yeah. And is this the best use of their time?
Yeah. And by the way, that was a very, very high power group of people. I mean, super, super senior folks. And at the end of that particular day, that moment got our highest evaluation.
I bet. And I wonder what this moment actually tells or help them to see about their organization and usual way of working.
Yeah.
Because I think that maybe that's just how they are used to have their leadership meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone just doing their own thing while someone else is speaking on about a PowerPoint presentation.
Absolutely. I was very lucky a few years ago to do the same format, sort of a short 2 or 3 day format with the same company in 3 different continents. And they asked me to come back and report afterwards what I saw. And so I told participants as well, I'm going to give a report back. I don't want to do this covertly. That's not ethical. But I said, I'm going to go back and say what I saw. And then I got to sit down with the sort of top 4 of HR and say, you've got some massive problems in my eyes because I see this, I see this, I see this. And they were like, really? And I said, yeah, it's 1 day. So, I mean, or 3 days. It's not a good sample, but this is what I saw. This is what I saw. Is it useful? And then, yes, that confirms some things that we thought,
And this maybe builds a little bridge to, I'm very curious, in your view with all your different backgrounds. So when we speak about difficult behaviors, what is your take on that with all your background in psychology, zoology, theater?
Yeah.
How do you, because there's some, and I get that people are not difficult. Behaviors is difficult. Very often it's an expression of a need. So if someone is disturbing, maybe they don't know why they are there. So there's an empathy part and there's a design part. How do we cater for that? And how can we avoid it? And what are the tricks or the hacks that you're using?
There's a lot here. If I take the theatre lens first, everybody is a hero in their own story. Yeah, everybody. You can watch the play Rashomon, for example. It's a very famous play that tells the same story from 3 different perspectives, and you go, you completely believe each one. And the next one comes, you think, oh no, I believe that one. And then, oh no, I believe that one now. And there is more than one reality, because reality is objective. It's subjective, sorry. And what's happening is the person who is being a pain in the whatever, didn't get up this morning thinking, I want to ruin Adam's day. Yeah. They got up with some priorities that were very important to them, which I'm not serving right now. And so one thing, or a couple of things to do around that are around being curious. So if there is resistance, be curious about why. Ask people why. And how you do that is the question. Do you do it quietly in the coffee break? Do you do it, overtly in front of the group? Do you do it in advance with an email? I mean, there's all kinds of different questions around that. How do I use status when I do that? Do I come at them as a peer level, as a servant level, as a leader level into that conversation? Which one will get me the most honesty or the most compliance? It's complicated, but generally being curious about that. And contracting, again, is part of that curiosity. What do you need to get from today? What needs to happen for today to be useful for you? Get that out early on and be interested if it's not what you expect. That's one thing. Then with the psychology stuff, I know there's lots of biases, especially around ego, which come from fragility and from fear and so on. And then how do I give people, this is also diplomacy. I mean, I'm sitting here in Germany, so you look back at, Bismarck always giving people a way out. I mean, Bismarck was a horrible bully. I mean, he bludgeoned people into agreeing to stuff. They did agree to stuff because he gave them ways to elegantly save face when he wasn't drinking them under the table because he drank the fish oil first. All this kind of stuff. But how do I find a way where there is value generated on all sides? And have the courage sometimes to say, okay, this is not going to happen today. Do you want to be somewhere else? Is it more useful for you to be somewhere else? And I will clear that with your sponsor. And I've done that quite a lot. Send people out or offer them the chance to leave.
What has to happen for you to send them out?
It's the feeling that they are neither giving or getting value. And I won't usually send people. Okay, if someone's racist or something, I'll send them out. Get out of my room. But if it's someone who is just arguing with me, which is fine. I'm not going to die if someone says, I don't like this way of working. That's great. What else have we got? But if that situation, if we can't find a way where they're going to get value and be useful to the group. And sometimes it's enough to say, look, you are so useful to the group. Would that be enough value to you just to know you've contributed? Or do you need something for yourself? And again, be happy with whatever answer you get. That can sometimes work. But again, you don't want to use rhetorical tricks and leading questions to make people do things they don't want to do.
Yes. And still this, I love this question because it perfectly caters to the ego. So is it enough for you that others get value from you?
Yeah.
Or do you need value for yourself?
Yeah.
So it's either way you have an egotistical.
Maybe. I mean, I don't want to trick anybody with it, but one of the best ways to not be sad about life or even to avoid depression and stuff like that is to do things for other people. That's not new. That's been around for a long time. And pointing out to people that that's what they're doing here, And then it might be a case of saying, okay, that would be fantastic. Look, what if we rearrange the timetable so you can get out an hour before everybody else? And we do your bit now or something like this to show. And often they get super enthusiastic then.
Yeah.
But there's another truism from the world of design, which is, I think, really important here. Customers who've never had a problem with their phone company or something, they are less loyal than customers who've had a problem and had it solved.
Yes, I can totally see that.
So we don't need to be perfect. But if a thing comes up and we can fix it, those people become our champions.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, there's always an underlying unmet need that drives this behavior. And and that's the teaching from the nonviolent communication, right?
Sure.
So what is the underlying need? Can we hear that? And it also shows that one of the basic needs is to be seen, heard, and valued.
Yes.
And if we can somehow, that was my learning with some behaviors that I find challenging, the know-it-alls. I've done that before. Who are you to teach me? Or to tell me or whatsoever, and to then give them the opportunity to contribute and say all the knowledge that you have. Yeah.
And if someone's watching this, not on video, but listening to it, they might not know that I'm an old white man. And I have all the old white man bonuses. And I know that many facilitators are not old white men. And some of the things I'm saying here are not as easy for them as they are for me.
Yeah, very true. What remains your facilitation challenge?
This is the one I thought a lot about. Well, thank you for the questions in advance, or some of them anyway. Well, this is the one that's been bugging me a lot recently. This sounds very self-serving, and I'm aware of that. But of course, nothing always goes right, and I have mess-ups and things that don't work out well. And there's not even a pattern to that. It just doesn't go right some days because I'm not as good as I think I am, like all of us. And one thing which has really bugged me recently is that I do invest quite a lot of time and front loading and so on into making sure that things do go well. And then what I have to swallow after that is you get the feedback. That was a great day. Everyone was so collaborative and they really, really liked it. We thought we spent too much time at the beginning on doing those things. Everything seemed very, very useful. Yeah. And of course, it's possible they weren't useful. They would have been awesome without all my engineering at the beginning. But I believe that helped because when I don't do it, I don't get those kind of results.
Yeah.
But it's really, really hard to say to somebody, that's why I did it. So it would be a great collaborative day, people in the right mindset, because so I say, that's great. Good feedback. Thank you. And swallow it. But I keep doing those things, And that is really annoying. Sorry.
I hear you. And I have an anecdote to share about that. And it relates to what you said earlier, that we don't want to trick them into doing something. And I think that actually this is our role. So I believe that facilitators are manipulators as long as we don't manipulate the results. But by creating these small nudges and letting them do things, answer questions or self-reflections, we do get them into a mindset so that they can then achieve the goals for which they came. And I recently, so I'm working with a client, I'm training consultants in facilitation skills because they want to facilitate themselves workshops at a big strategy event. Beautiful. And usually I do the same session twice per week, one in the afternoon, one in the morning, so that they can adjust to their time schedule. In the first session, I did the rookie mistake because I was so excited about the question. I thought, they're so confident in what they do and they do facilitate a lot. I asked them the question as a warm-up, a kind of turn to your neighbor moment. In what ways can you be in the way of the desired outcome of the workshop or the engagement that you seek? And this workshop this training session totally felt flat.
Oh, wow.
I had the impression that they didn't really dare, that we did a question brainstorm and they didn't generate questions. I'm like, what is happening? What's missing? In the second session, so different group of people, but same company and style, and otherwise the exact same flow. The only thing I did was changing the initial question, the warm-up question. And I asked them, what was a powerful question you have been asked that might have changed something for you?
Nice.
Which got them to introspect, to share about themselves, to create a bond. And this was a beautiful session. They shared questions, they brainstormed, they took risks, and were open. And this really made me realize that the way how we start and create this container is so important, because I realized, yes, they might show their confident side, but at the end of the day, they also have their struggles, and asking them how they can be an obstacle to their success puts them right in the point where they create self-doubt, questioning their ability and all that.
Yeah. And I think those kind of, so I'm not someone who embraces conflict naturally. I try to smooth it and so on. So when I need to do difficult stuff like that, if it's appropriate, I often use humor around it. That's my escape route. I've had many, many decades in comedy and so on. I can make most things funny if I want to. At least I believe they're funny. But that's interesting. When you said that, I noticed that I often also ask questions like that, but I do put them into like a slightly comic twist, So we would use it like, okay, let's imagine we want to totally sabotage this project.
Yeah. The pre-mortem.
And you do the Musical. I use lots of music and sound in my work, yeah? And then you kind of put that framing around it, it's let's twirl our mustaches for the moment and see. And that kind of thing, I think, can help with heavy moments. Of course, it's totally inappropriate in some things, obviously. Yeah. But, but that's also my Achilles heel sometimes, is that I always look for the sort of the comedian's way out of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about, what was it called?
Facilitation.
Facilitation. I love that. I'm going to steal that. But this sort
I didn't invent it.
Yeah. Okay. But this sort of smoke and mirrors stuff, and my model for facilitation is quite strongly based on someone called Augusto Boal, who is a theatre maker. Yeah. The Theatre of the Oppressed from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, I believe, who died a few years ago. And he does this special form of participatory theatre called forum theatre or theatre of the oppressed, or we call it investigative rehearsal, is a version of that, where the person who is what we would call a facilitator has the title the Joker. Yeah. And that is the Joker from a pack of cards. And this is my model of facilitation. I think it's a very interesting one. I'm very interested in medieval history. Most of my weekends are spent dressed up and hitting people. But in medieval courts all over the world, I mean, and not just in the medieval times, but that's the strongest image we have in Europe of that. You have people who are in the court as in this role of the fool, the jester, and so on. And they have a couple of things which are really important about them. The first one is they're never going to be king. Yeah. Because they are low-born, or they have physical or mental challenges, or whatever it is. Yeah. So there's no danger of them being ever seeking power. Yeah. And because of that, they can be quite trusted. And the other one is that there are two others. One is that they are like the Joker in a pack of cards. They're not part of the power structure. In a pack of cards, the Joker is not a diamond or a club. Yeah. It's its own thing. It can jump in or jump out of those, and it can change its value by adjusting its relative status, we would say, in facilitation. Do I come over as a leader, as a servant, as a peer, or some shades of those? Yeah. And the third thing is they can use humor to make things palatable, to take out the pain from stuff. Because when we are laughing with somebody, we're always acknowledging a common humanity. Mm-hmm. I can laugh at somebody. That's not okay. But if I laugh with somebody, even if they're my nemesis, in this moment, we're saying, okay, we're both struggling here. We're both seeing the funny side of this. There's a great example of one of the very famous French jesters in the 100 Years' War. There was a big thing called the Battle of Sluys, where the English and the French navies those days were ships side by side, and you fight with swords across, it was very, very primitive stuff. But they met, and there was a horrible defeat for the French. And no one could tell the king. The king at the time was quite fragile and quite choleric, and no one would tell him until his jesters said, I think I wrote a song actually, to say how brave the French knights were because they all jumped into the sea to meet the English. And of course, you can imagine medieval armor jumping into the sea means you're dead. Yeah, so that was the way he could do this, to make that thing palatable. So I think it's very interesting to think about what of that might fit someone's facilitation style. How far I am within the power structures. Yeah. And also, what is my way of dealing with things that might be difficult for people to hear?
And in all of that, I think it's so important to keep our own authenticity. So trying to be funny if actually we don't feel comfortable, or maybe we're not, if we're not gifted.
No.
Maybe not a good idea.
Absolutely. And it is authentic for me. Yeah. And it's not for somebody else. And I can't do things that you can do, and you can't do things that I can do. And that's great. Yeah. And there is another theatre saying, which I found super, super useful in my facilitation years, is that the audience will forgive you anything until you embarrass them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if the lights fall over and your pants fall down. It doesn't matter if you laugh or get over it or apologize in a way which is touching. Yeah. But if you make them feel shame, the Germans have a wonderful word, Fremdschämen, when you feel shame for somebody else. Yeah. You've lost the audience, and there's no way you can get them back. If you pick on someone, that will embarrass them, and you've lost them. Yeah. If you handle your own mistakes in a wrong way, that will embarrass them, and you've lost them. There's so many options.
I was just coming back yesterday from a street theater festival in France.
Oh, nice.
And beautiful. And there was one play, and it reminded me of exactly what you said, where the microphone didn't work. So they spent 10 minutes trying to fix it. And they stayed in character doing that.
Yeah.
And made a show out of it. Of course, it was kind of lost time, but they made the best out of it. And the audience just loved them for it because they owned it. They created something around it.
And they got something unique as well.
Yeah. And they showed the humanity as well, which is very bonding.
One of my favorite classic psychology experiments is psychologists always do like these real life experiments. So you go to the psychology department for testing and you think you're going to press a button and so on, and you do that. But actually the experiment was when you were in the hallway outside and someone dropped some papers. You know, that kind of tricking is always going on. And one of the places they like to do it is in restaurants, because in restaurants you can measure how something comes over by the tip. You know, we people don't know they're an experiment, which is ethically interesting, but they give a tip or not, or they give a higher or lower tip, and you can see how effective this was. And there's a wonderful classic experiment where the waiter comes over and they have the bill on a piece of paper and some candy. Yeah. One piece of candy each. And you see what the tip is. Yeah. And it's whatever. Let's call it 10. Yeah. And then you do the same waiter, the same restaurant, different night. And now you give 2 bits of candy per person with the receipt, with the bill, sorry. And then the tip is slightly higher. Just a little bit, but slightly, measurably, significantly higher because they got more candy. But then the next night, the same waiter, the same restaurant, what happens is the waiter gives them the bill with 1 piece of candy each, starts to walk away, turns around and brings back and drops a few more pieces of candy. So now they have 2 more pieces of candy each. So the same amount of candy as the night before, and the tip goes rocketing because people thought they got a special treatment.
Yeah.
Now, if they see you doing that to every table, you're in trouble, of course. Yeah.
Yes.
But like with your example there, people genuinely got something new and they're going to appreciate that, something which is just for them. And this is another reason I think why it's important that facilitation shouldn't be too slick. It needs to be a thing which is co-created between the participants and the facilitator in whatever roles they are, so that people know this only happened today.
Yeah.
Even if Miriam does the same course this afternoon, it's not the same as the one we had today because my input was in this one.
Exactly. Thank you for this example. I love it. And it also shows the role of reciprocity. How important reciprocity, that we have this intrinsic urge to also give back if we are given. And it reminds me what you just said, this uniqueness. I hosted another training, and at some point I realized that we're running an hour late. Totally lost track of time. We had awesome conversations, really went deep, and then suddenly, I did this hour ago. And I shared that with them. I'm like, okay, sorry, we lost an hour. Here's what we can do. These are the 2 options. And I suggest we do this. Is this okay for you? And this was one of the highlights so it was a facilitation training. And they pointed that out in the feedback session, that this was the moment where they felt that I'm here not to deliver the training and to put all this knowledge into their brains, but I was there for them and cater to their needs. Yes. And that was a very good reminder.
It is. People are always impressed by this. And honestly, they think it's harder than it is. I mean, I was with Renatus. We were over in New York doing a training, and they wanted the advanced training on something. Yeah. This was a design training. Yeah. And we said, we'd rather start from the basics and make sure you're all at the same level. They go, no, they're super important people. Haven't got time. We said, we're worried. We're going to give you an exam. They've all got to take the exam. If they pass the exam, they come along to this advanced training, but we're not going to take anybody who doesn't. They go, fine. They're used to that. Make a Google Forms thing, send it out. They all pass. You know, we got them all pass through it. We rock up there on Monday morning in Manhattan and we set up our Post-its and our flip charts. And these people come in and we say, what do you hope to get from this? We're doing our contracting I mentioned before. What needs to happen between now and the end of the week that this is useful for you? And they're saying questions. We're writing them down. We're thinking, these are basic questions. This is not advanced stuff that we're getting here. Yeah. And so it's okay, we're curious about these questions because they're not what we expected. How much experience do you have of this? And none. What had happened, there'd been some big business crisis over the weekend, and all those senior people had been diverted to the business crisis and all sent juniors. So with like 2 or 3 exceptions, 17 out of 20 people were not qualified for the course that we were supposed to teach. Yeah. And our sponsor was like, okay, we cancel. And we said, no, it's fine. Give us half an hour and we'll have something which works for all of these. And it's not hard. I mean, we have enough stuff on the back burner and people really appreciate it. They don't expect the same level of preparation if they know you're pulling it out of thin air. And again, that was a super, super high evaluation from them because they were just expecting someone to rock up with PowerPoints and just go through the slides in that order, not to have someone who's flexible. And that's one reason, by the way, I always work on flip charts, not on PowerPoint, because except for that introductory part or showing a movie or something, which you can't do on a flip chart, because it gives you that flexibility to say, I'm going to do something else then. Let's do something else.
I love that. And it also reminds me that when you said not to be too slick, that we as humans usually don't like perfection in others. We seek it for ourselves. But if we have someone who is just perfect and everything is perfectly prepared and works out as planned, it makes us feel somehow insecure.
Yeah.
And I think especially if we're in a creative session, creative project, we want them to embrace the good enough for now, the be yourself, show up as you are. And then the perfection can actually be in the way.
Yeah. Which is why I don't use graphic facilitators in a situation where I want people to draw themselves, because they don't want to draw next to a professional. So I use them in a conference situation, or if it's like a discussion, they'll make a graphic recording of that. That's fantastic. But I won't do that in a kind of a workshop situation where I want folks to be scribbling stuff and making sticky notes and building, we say shitty first drafts. It's a naughty word, I know, but it's a real design term. Comes from Hemingway.
Didn't know that.
Oh no, this is a real thing in design. Hemingway, who was a bit of a shoddy person himself, apparently, but was an amazing author. And when you read Hemingway, I don't know if you have, but it's incredibly clear. It's like you're thinking it yourself. It's short sentences, simple words, most of it. And it's just amazing. And he got that clarity, he said, because he used to iterate every page up to 100 times.
And he was the one.
Times. And he said the first draft of anything is, sorry, naughty word. The first draft of anything is shit. And that's an incredibly liberating thing to teach people. Just get something out of you onto paper, because it's not a commitment. It's not a marriage. It's just a first attempt, and it can go anywhere from here.
Yeah. Reminds me of Seth Godin, who says, if you're not embarrassed of the first version of your product, you ship too late.
Yeah, exactly. Rodriguez, the filmmaker, who says everyone's got, I think he says, 40 bad films in them. So make them before you're 18. Just get them out.
And yeah. When I started the podcast, I had a podcast coach, and he also said, Miriam, your first 20, 50 episode will be shit. Yeah. So just start as soon as possible and keep the momentum. And very few people will actually listen to the first episodes anyway.
Yeah, it's true. And it's liberating. I mean, we have stickers that say shitty first draft on them, and we give them out to people, and Mark Stickdorn, my other colleague, makes them, and they love it. That's like one of the big takeaways, because I'm going to annoy my mother now, who's a teacher, as I said, a fine teacher. And she taught various levels, but often it was quite young kids. And the basic model of primary education, she'll hate me for saying this, but it is the teacher sets a question. There is one answer. Do it in your best handwriting. Yeah. And that is what most of us take into our future lives. The idea that there is a right answer and it needs to look good. Yeah. And if I'm smart, I will know it straight away, and I'll have beautiful handwriting from the beginning. And that's just not reality, especially in design context where I am. It's mad thing. It's like, first of all, teacher, why this question? What's behind this question? Yeah. Are there other questions we could be looking at? Let's have a conversation around that. Let's go and have a look at the world, and then, it's obviously not one answer. There could be hundreds of possible answers. How about I put 10, 15 crappy ones together, and we see which ones work, which ones take us further. And it sounds ridiculous in a school context, but that's what we should be doing in schools.
Yes. And if we don't have the opportunity to do it in schools, at least do it then in the boardrooms.
Exactly.
So the question brainstorm, I love doing question brainstorms with in my workshops. And that because everyone is so quick with finding solutions and finding answers. And most questions we're asking are actually crap, because they're either suggestive, or they're too limiting, or they're too broad. And once we have a question, then let them brainstorm on other questions related to that question. Then they understand all the complexity and the different perspectives. Really they can look at it. And it takes away also the pressure of coming up with solutions, ideas.
Yeah.
Question is a question. You can ask all the dangerous why questions you want.
Yeah.
Nobody will answer them for now.
I think that's really important because organizations, and this is a real battle in design, where we most of design is research. Most of design is being curious, and then actually producing the solution is the smaller second part, and it's really, really hard to get people's interested in that, to get them to commit money to doing that, because they don't think you've actually started work until you're working on a solution.
Reminding me of Einstein. If I have to find a solution in 1 hour, I spend 55 minutes on asking the right question.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly it, yeah.
But that phase of curiosity, or that time of curiosity, that time of looking around and poking things and licking things and, seeing what is going on and understanding if we're even standing in the right place to ask this question, that is not seen as work yet. That is seen as preparation. And I think that's a big mistake, because that is where the important work happens.
I wonder whether there's also another side to that, which is the danger of asking questions. I think I recorded an episode recently with Mike Parker, and he said that in most organizations, it's not safe to ask questions. And that's what people learn. Yeah. Because if you ask questions, either they're coming from this old school model where you ask questions because you don't know the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas nowadays we ask questions because we're interested in different perspectives and in wonder. And if in an organization, people are in one way or another shamed, bullied, if they ask questions, very quickly lose the skill. Yeah.
It's also it's the nerd factor, who are the ones who ask questions at school. They're the ones who sit at the front and, nobody likes them. They try too hard. They're not sitting at the back being cool. I was one of those. I was a nerd. Yeah. And I still am. Yeah.
Which then also makes it difficult in the Q&A sessions or collecting questions.
Yeah.
One thing I like to do is with groups that are not too big, I say that everyone has to ask a question. And if they cannot think of a question, they have 3 bonus questions. And then I have 3 bonus questions. They're either very silly questions about the weather in Amsterdam or my age or what, or some question that I would think could be interesting. And then everyone can say something and they can pull a bonus question if they want.
Yeah. Yeah. Often I just do the classic, talk to your neighbor first and design some questions together, because often it's that speaking into the void and not knowing if you misunderstood the task and so on. But if you have a social check beforehand, Belina Raffi, another brilliant colleague, she'll often ask people to get in small groups and design questions they thought would be powerful for everybody. And she has different phases of, this is a question that's just for you, and this is a question which is you think is good for the group.
I love that.
That's a nice one as well. Yeah.
And the co-design with the question with the neighbor, I think, is especially important in the virtual context.
Yes.
Because we don't have this clue where we can just make sure that we're not about to ask something totally stupid. Yeah.
Which is why, dear listeners, it's very important that we get to use video platforms and we can do quick breakouts.
Yes.
We can do breakouts of 30 seconds, of 45 seconds, and then back in quickly. Yeah. That's a really, really key functionality, and it's not given by every piece of software that I use.
30 seconds. I've never tried 30 seconds. I think the longest on Zoom is 2 minutes, or did they change it?
No, you can screw that down as far as you like, down to 10 seconds, but you have to go into the settings and do it. And I set all my Zoom. If you listen, a technical moment here, I set my Zoom to 1 hour. Each breakout is always 1 hour. And then the breakouts I use are anything between 17 minutes and 50 seconds or 15 seconds even. But I see when I make the breakout room, the 1 hour counting down, so I can see how long I've been going. I haven't got to set a timer. Yeah. So that's quite useful. And then, you're watching the Miro board, you're seeing how far they're getting along, or you're just running through the conversation in your head, and then you send out the 15-second warning and close the room. But I will use 5 or 6 short breakouts like that in 20 minutes.
Yeah. I also love the short breakouts, and I always use the countdown timer and give them a warning and hesitate to close it earlier.
Yeah, I give a warning too. But that's where I lie. So on timing, I lie. One of my questions on a technical rider is the room may not have a clock. And if there is a clock, I'll take it down or cover it over. And I don't use things like those red countdown timer type things. I use a verbal one because then I change it all the time. So if I've planned 15 minutes for this exercise, I'll probably tell them, you have 12 minutes. Yeah. And then if they are not really started after 3 minutes, I'll say half time. So, oh my goodness. Yeah. So this is one place I am using circus tricks. Or if we've had 14 minutes and they're in the middle of something really, really important, I'll say 6 more minutes. And then give them 10 if they need it. Yeah. So liquid time, we call that. And I think it's very, very important to understand you have the real time, but also the time that you say, and they don't need to be consistent.
Yeah. And that's what I love about the in-person facilitation. And now on Zoom, it's easier because you can see the activity in the breakouts.
Yeah.
So if they're still talking a lot, then it's okay. But if you see that it's getting slower and slower, that the microphones are popping up, then
or the sticky notes moving on the whiteboard or whatever. Yeah. But it's much more difficult. And I don't like listening in. You can listen in with some programs. I don't think that's very ethical, to be honest. So I don't use that.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I always tell them that the breakout room is like Las Vegas.
Yeah.
What
happens in the breakout room stays in the breakout rooms.
Yes. Unless they want to share it.
Sure.
What is the one thing that you would have wished to know before when you started facilitation?
That it's not up to me. Yeah, that it's that I do not have to do all the work or even make sure all the work gets done, but that I have to give people the opportunity to do the work and the reminders of what they're not doing. But fundamentally at the end, it's their work. You know, facilitator, facilitator, do, facilitator, make easy. You know, we're there to make things easier and difficile, to make things more difficult at times. Another thing from Boa, we're also a difficultator. It's also up to us, or we have the responsibility sometimes to say, not good enough. Oh, I don't think it's good enough. Do you want to go to the board with this? Okay, I wouldn't.
Or to create little challenges. That's something that I learned from a video game designer, Colleen Panier, on a podcast, where she shared, in video games, we don't want it to be easy because then it's boring. When we play golf, we have this long stick because otherwise we take the ball and we walk to the hole. But then we don't learn and it's not fun. So how can we design challenges? How can we make it just an inch more difficult so that the learning moment is there?
I like that. Yeah. And this is really important. I mean, playfulness generally, in my company name is the word play in there, but we don't come over initially as playful. You know, as I said, wear suits and we use PowerPoint at the beginning and so on. But play is such a misunderstood and powerful activity or a mindset to be playful, and you don't hurt yourself as much, and the conflicts are not so bad, and you get more done if you do it right. So Jay McGonigal writes about this in the great book Reality is Broken, about how many billions of hours of work have been given to things like World of Warcraft. Because in World of Warcraft, you do work. You go to the pub, you get the mission, you go off and you try to solve the mission, you come back and you get paid. That is work. But for some reason, people are doing this all night, you know, because they love it so much. Why is that work interesting? Because it has a playful framing around it.
Yeah. And then if you say play or playful element, what I'm thinking of is a clear context boundary with rules that apply now that might not apply to the outside
freedom
world.
Within structure, yeah. The classic freedom within structure. And it's important also sometimes you're discovering those boundaries as you go. You know, and again, I don't use the word play very often, though it's in the company name. I mean, Renata Sogenrad, again, he's taught me some great things. If I'm going to do something really, really wacky with them, I'll say, let's try some brain training.
Brain training?
Yeah. Oh, brain training. Okay. Because the folks who like games, they're going to jump in anyway. Yeah. But the folks who reject that, who see play as the opposite of work, which it obviously isn't, but they think it is. Brain training that's okay. That's interesting. Yeah. I might say, let's try an experiment, or I'd like to do a little simulation here. Would you join with me on that? You know, those kind of words, those less playful words are what give you the permission to do playful things.
Yeah. And then by defining some assumptions, suddenly it becomes a very scientific setup.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe.
Although assumptions are just rules of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, nice.
Our time is almost out.
It's been fun.
Yes.
Don't know if it was useful for anybody, but it's been fun.
It's been useful for me.
Me too.
So, and I'm sure that it will be as useful for the audience. We didn't speak about service design doing. We didn't speak about
That's okay.
The book you co-wrote, and there's so many questions that maybe we have another opportunity.
Maybe. But if folks are interested in that, I want to give them a playful and very structured context in which they can look into such things, which is the Global Service Jam or the Global Jams, which are these very playful, worldwide hackathon type of events, which we initiated a few years ago and which volunteers all over the world run a couple of times a year. So if you go to globaljams.org, no punctuation, globaljams.org, you can go along and join or even host the next one. And it's a fantastic way to learn about facilitation, about collaboration, about things like service design, if that interests you, to meet people locally, to build professional networks, and just to have a great weekend.
Thank you. And we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and it's free, and no one makes any money from it. So you might pay a local sort of cost balancing amount, but no one makes any profit from it. It's a non-profit thing, and it's a great community. So check it out.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share, speak about?
I think I just slipped it in there. I wanted to get the jams across because it really is where I have met the most amazing people. And a lot of the people I've mentioned today who I've learned stuff from, those relationships have kicked off at the jams or been cemented by them. So if you are interested in that doing, not talking, and learning this stuff by trying things out and having a safe space in which you can mess it up, things like jams or run your own one, whatever, they're really, really useful. So check them out.
Thank you. Also because it highlights that facilitation is about community and it's best done in collaboration, and you're standing on the shoulders of giants.
It has to be, I think. It has to be. None of us can do this alone, and we're lucky enough when we're facilitating a project or workshop, whatever, we're surrounded by smart people, and there's not much that we cannot do with the people in the group with us. Whatever the technical problem is, whatever the social problem is, or the targeting problem is, together we can get through it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a delight.
For me too. Great to spend time with you.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.